Well, it's so great to join all of you today, and my apologies to Savannah. I think the link I sent you means that my name is on your picture. There aren't two Sally Mannings here, but I'm so happy to be here with you today. And we're so lucky to have these three kind of local experts who are really going to share both some preventative and some actual intervention approaches with us today. We've learned so much already, and now it's time to even dig a little deeper. I'd like to just share some brief bios of our three presenters. Then each of them will present between 12 and 15 minutes. And at the very end, there'll be an opportunity for us to ask them some questions. So please think about your questions as we're going along, write them in the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. First, Celia Clement will share. She received her bachelor's from Cornell back in the 70s and graduated from Columbia in 1980 with a master's degree in social work and was a school social worker with Ithaca for many years. She has a special interest around bullying awareness, prevention and response, and developed a lot of programs that she'll be sharing with us. She also developed workshops addressing bullying and cyberbullying to community groups and parent groups. Her parents are Holocaust survivors, and that really has informed her work about the consequences of not standing up to hate. The next we'll have Savannah Thomas, who's the school services coordinator for the Community Dispute and Resolution Center, and she also works in the Elmira City School District. She offers conflict coaching, mediation, and circles work with students and classrooms that are experiencing conflict. She does one-on-one sessions, and she facilitates many different restorative practices and exercises, and holds mediations and gives students the chance to recognize what they did wrong and how to go about restoring harm. And then last, Jeff Godowski will join us. Jeff joined Cornell as the Assistant Dean for Flora Rose House in 2018. They have served in various roles in residence life and student affairs throughout their career, specifically in living learning community programs and restorative practices. He's a member of the Restorative Practices in Higher Education Learning Collaborative and is a trained facilitator of the International Institute for Restorative Practices. He also facilitates some local community circle practice and restorative opportunities at the library. At Tompkins County Public Library, it's open to all community members, and they facilitate space where students and teams and individuals can really practice vulnerability and understand more about themselves and others. We're so happy to welcome you all here, and Celia will kick it off for us.
Okay, hello. I'm gonna just get my screen up here. Thank you, Sally, and I'm honored to serve on this panel. And thank you to Dr. Hinduja and Amanda for your wonderfully relevant and helpful presentations. In my years of practice as a school social worker, I've enjoyed working in 4 elementary schools and middle and high school. School communities are mirrors of society. I'm just going to put this here. School communities are mirrors of society with many similar dynamics. The characteristics that I will be focusing on is a tendency for societies to develop hierarchies. Those with more status exert their power over those with less status. And in some primary and secondary schools, this can mean that the older students feel entitled to treat younger students in unkind ways, sometimes rising to bullying. Those that are bullied at school have over twice the rate of being bullied online. By creating kind, inclusive school communities, bullying and cyberbullying, as well as unkind behaviors, are less likely to occur. And when they do happen, the students from these healthy school cultures are more likely to know how to respond in a kind and helpful way by standing up to the hurtful behaviors, either online or in the schoolyard. These are students who share ownership and thereby take responsibility for maintaining a kind culture. I'll spend the next few minutes outlining a path whereby students look out for one another and take care of the younger and socially more vulnerable community members. For example, students on the autism spectrum and students who identify as LGBTQ or are perceived to be LGBTQ. Students who feel that they have a role to play as helpful upstanders at school can carry on this attitude on social media. Ultimately, it requires that students need to trust adults. The current statistics do not reflect that trust. Nationwide, only 19% of students report bullying and only 11% report cyberbullying. It starts with laying down a foundation of kindness and inclusiveness. To accomplish this, I've developed school programs which partner with students. One is for elementary schools named FAB, and the other is WHAM for secondary schools. I'll briefly outline the steps to implementing these norm-changing programs. The first norm I changed in my elementary schools was to establish the practice of having was to address the practice of having boyfriends and girlfriends. I collaborated with the principals to establish an expectation that there are no boyfriends or girlfriends. This eliminated a dynamic whereby the focus of students' attention was who's going out with who do you like, who just broke up. This drama ends up causing rumors, distress, and power dynamics that spill into classrooms and take the attention off schoolwork. Once the older boys no longer feel they need to be attractive and cool to impress the girls, and the girls no longer felt pressure to have a boyfriend to establish their popularity, it removed one of the components that can perpetuate a power structure. It goes without saying that this drama can easily play out in social media. FAB stands for Friendship Assistance Brigade, and I will outline some of the steps in creating this foundation of kindness. First, I conducted a survey asking students how they feel in the community and how much unkind behavior they notice. I'd like to underline the fact that I do not use the word bullying, which is too limiting a term. I explained to students that kind and unkind behaviors are more reflective of what occurs. I asked them to keep their focus on kindness, and if they encouraged and modeled kindness, that would ultimately result in less bullying. Once the survey was completed, I tabulated the data using colorful pie charts and presented the findings to the students. Rather than doing the interpreting myself, I asked them, hey, what do you see? What do you think of this? Frequently, survey results are not shared with students, yet they are the ones that are most urgently need to see it. They are the stakeholders, and by sharing this with them, I demonstrated that I respected their opinion and invited them to be partners in moving forward. When I was ready to start FAB, I pitched it to the 4th and 5th graders. Remember when you were the younger ones and you looked up to the 4th and 5th graders and wanted to be like them? Now that you are the oldest students, you can choose to be a good role model, and the younger students want to be kind like you. And they too will want to be in FAB when they get older. And this is exactly what happened. Most of the younger siblings of FAB members also joined when they were old enough. We met during lunch and recess once a week. During this time, they practiced the skits that had been developed over the years, often in response to situations brought to our attention by students or teachers. They performed the skits, which are unscripted improvs, 3 times. Take 1 is the unkind way. Take 2 involves an upstander stepping in, and take 3 is the kindest way. Some of the more popular skits were include others in play, boys and girls can play together without teasing, share the ball, party invitations from home, be kind when someone makes a mistake, no bragging, done 3 times, bragging about grades, bragging about winning, and bragging about some expensive new item you received. And stop means stop. These skits were then presented at school assemblies or in individual classrooms. During our time together, we read and discussed books about bullying, upstanders, and kindness. We spent time problem solving and learned how to resolve conflicts, and developed compassion and empathy. Here are some examples of how I knew FAB was successful. First, bullying events decreased. One example of awareness and compassion occurred when 3 students came to me and reported that they had read the book about autism from the school library. And from that information concluded that one of their students, their classmates, fit the description. And furthermore, he was being bullied right under the teacher's nose, and the teacher was unaware. Another successful outcome happened when a socially isolated young boy on the autism spectrum joined FAB. He initially did not join. I attribute that to the fact that he didn't even really understand the idea. So I called his mother and asked for permission to be more persistent in my invitation to have him join. Well, he did join, and became one of the most active and excited skit actors. He was even in a skit for the entire school. Other members of FAB had shared with me that he had been bullied the year before. They told me that this with him present. I asked them to look out for him. He stopped being bullied and he did develop a friendship group. The takeaway is that recruitment often involves reaching out personally to students. Two other opportunities I found for laying down the foundation of kindness. I offered lessons to all the 4th and 5th grade students' classrooms about safe, kind, and smart use on the internet. We covered everything from pop-ups to spam, social media, netiquette, chain mail, addiction and cyberbullying, and about sharing photos or anything online. Cyberbullying was the most comprehensive unit and included covering sexting with the 5th graders. I would describe the forms of cyberbullying and explain ways to be an upstander. I proposed that one of the avenues they could take was to befriend the target and not to be sucked into the back and forth flame war. Throughout, I pointed out the importance of letting the adults know. And we practiced how to respond kindly online after brainstorming some ideas. I also always asked them to educate me about their online experiences. They were eager to share what was happening in the cyber world and their cyber worlds, and via their questioning and invitation to share, they disclosed some scary situations that they had encountered. My intention was that by asking questions and providing space for them to share their experiences, I was building the trust and the open communication that are necessary components when creating safe and kind communities. Another vital component to creating inclusive and safe schools is to be present during recess. It entails walking around and noticing what is happening socially. Who is all alone? Are girls permitted to join sports activities? And are all boys treated respectfully? And are all players treated respectfully? How are teams picked? This brings me to the underlying principles that point to best practice for all school staff in preventing bullying. Pay attention. Bad stuff happens right under the noses of adults, regardless of why teachers don't intervene. This is interpreted by students as they don't care. There are, of course, many school staff, including teacher aides, who do pay close attention have been some of the most effective responders to unkind behavior. A few examples of paying attention. If you see a group roughhousing and everyone is laughing, don't assume that everyone is having a good time. Be aware of the pecking order. Talk privately with a student on the bottom. Ask them if they are enjoying it. They may say yes, but if you have a gut feeling that this is one-sided, you can ask all of them politely to stop the roughhousing. Another example of paying attention happened years ago when I came across a student sitting by himself eating his lunch. Another student approached him asking him for a sandwich, which he immediately handed over. I asked him privately later if he meant to share his food, and he said no. I asked him if he'd like me to talk to the other student or if he wanted to, and he asked me to. When I approached the other student, he was taken aback. He'd assumed that the other student was okay with it and promised not to ask him for food again. The takeaway is pay attention, ask questions, interview the person of concern privately, never with the perpetrator, and follow through. Ask questions. I have found that youth love to talk about social issues online and in school. They just may not want to disclose what is happening to themselves. To get around this, I ask what they are seeing in terms of bullying or unkind behavior in others. Once the pressure is off them, I have found the students are very forthcoming. Third, follow through. On many occasions, students have reported to me that in their schools, there was an initial big response to the bullying, but that once the situation had blown over, there was no follow-through and the bullying reemerged. This turns out to be one of the chief reasons that students don't share what is happening. They think that either the adults will do nothing helpful or that they will make it worse. They do not trust that the adults will intervene in a successful way. And fourth, be the one. Make sure that every student has at least one adult in the school that they feel close to. Someone must be the one to ensure that every student feels that they belong to a caring community. Which brings me to WHAM, a program for middle and high school students. WHAM stands for Welcoming Allies and Mentors. It came about many years ago when a teacher approached me and asked if I could do something about the high schoolers, in effect, hazing the new middle schoolers. My school spanned 6th to 12th grade. I began with a survey and I had a team of students analyze the results and pursue a program that would address their concerns. WHAM grew out of this. WHAM totally switched it up, creating a new school norm from having older students complain about and harass or ignore younger students to being their allies, friends, and advocates. There are no skits involved. Instead, older students are matched with incoming sixth graders and other new students. These mentors are responsible for orienting new students over one day of information sharing and ice-breaking games. They are then paired with their students for the rest of the year and often continue this relationship until they graduate. They become the go-to person when their mentee has questions or concerns. The WHAM team also met once a week to discuss the general tone of the community and any problems that they had seen. One such issue, for example, was that the older students were budging in the lunch line. We brought in an expert to discuss suicide, signs, responses, and the necessity of sharing concerns with adults. We learned about hidden and not so hidden disabilities, and we recruited students with OCD, muscular dystrophy, ADD, Tourette's, and autism to be spokespeople at an assembly to share some of the characteristics of their disability and how it produced challenges, and most importantly, how the community could be supportive. This trust and sharing of information are indicative of a community that is safe, kind, and inclusive. WHAM also organized fun bonding events for their mentees. Just as with FAB, there are no barriers to joining WHAM, no grade requirements, no behavior requirements, no essays or teacher recommendations. And like FAB, I actively recruited students that would offer diversity. I had one student sign up who was known to the community as being unkind. I reminded him that in signing up, he would have to be a good role model and that he didn't exactly have that reputation. He assured me that he was ready and eager to turn a new leaf. He ended up being one of the most effective leaders and a terrific role model. Another student that I actively recruited was a loner. He reluctantly joined and became one of the most popular WHAM mentors. His students absolutely adored him, and he came out of his shell and relished the discovery that he had something to offer others. One member of WHAM became a very vocal and articulate leader for students on the autism spectrum. Another strategy I have used to open the communication and establish kind, inclusive schools norms is that for incoming sixth graders, I taught the internet class as well as a section about how to be a helpful upstander. I also conducted a survey of the sixth graders to ascertain if they felt safe and welcome and to provide them with the opportunity to express concerns. So how does this apply to cyberbullying? Because once the community has a norm of looking after each other with kindness and compassion, it does migrate to online behavior. What I noticed was that when something did go awry, students were more likely to find adults to share concerns with. They had acquired the skills and the compassion to be helpful upstanders, and they had trust in the adults to be helpful. In summary, to have the best outcome in maintaining safe, inclusive, and kind school cultures, students need to feel trust in their adults. Adults need to partner with students and demonstrate that they care and are truly interested in what they have to say. Students need to take the helm in establishing and maintaining norms of kindness and inclusiveness. And I do have also the elementary school bibliography here, which will be sent to you, I believe. And I wanted to just show you two other wonderful resources. This one I love. It's called Let's Get Real, and it's a videotape and a booklet. And I use that for 5th and 6th and 7th graders. It's a wonderful way to talk about bullying from the standpoint of the bully, the bullied, the reform bully, the upstander, and the bystander. So I think that's it.
Thanks so much, Celia, for those great examples of your work and for the resources that will be shared. Next, we have Savannah, who's going to share some about her work.
Yes, so I'm Savannah. I did change my name so it wasn't confusing to people. I've been here at Parley Coburn now for 4 years. The students here call me Miss Storm, and I do a bunch of I guess different services here for the students, depending on what they need and the things that, might set them off either here at home or here within the school. Because we definitely see both sides, problems stemming from home and here. So it's really tricky sometimes to differentiate between the two. But once we figure that out, we can get rolling. Bullying here definitely is a huge topic. It unfortunately happens a lot. We have some staff members that feel like, this is normal behavior, it's just kids being kids, kind of like that old saying of boys will be boys. I don't really like those sayings, but that's me. Because everybody's being, not everybody, but there's a lot of students here being bullied, and there's a lot of students participating in it, whether it be just here at school or they take it home with them, whether it be through TikTok. Snapchat's a big one. So we have students that they'll post like Snap stories, and when they do that, other students end up screenshotting and then they'll send it. And then it just becomes this whole viral thing around the school. And then by the time we even get here, students are like, yo, did you see that? Yo, did you see this person? So it like right from the beginning, sometimes it's just a huge problem that we're coming into. And then to go back to TikTok, another thing that we've been seeing, TikTok has been having these challenges, and some of the one challenge we had here at the school, I ended up holding a meeting with the students, kind of like an assembly. It was a TikTok challenge, and it was challenging students to, like, say if they asked to do something and the staff member or teacher said no, or hey, we need to do this instead of doing that. It encouraged the students to like become violent with the staff members. So either like hitting them or kicking them or throwing a desk at them. We had some students participate in that. So that was like really, really sad. And it was kind of scary too, just the fact that you could really see how much social media can drive some of these students and really make them do things so they can feel like they can fit in. So that was one incident. And I sat back and I was thinking, and I was talking to some colleagues here, because they're like, we never had phones in school. We never had phones in school. Or they give you back in the day when I was that age. That talk doesn't work with some of the kids. They're like, really? Here we go again. So I came up with this cell phone box idea. And basically what we did was I went class to class and I had the students help me decorate a box. And it locks, so there's a lock on it so nobody can get in or out besides the teacher. And I found that by keeping the students engaged and letting them participate in this project, I would say, they became more apt to do it and follow along with the rules. So doing the box, we explained the rules, and I was like, listen, when you come in the morning, when you drop your stuff at your locker and you come through the door, your cell phone goes in the box. Now, some teachers let kids leave the sound on. There's emergency cases sometimes where students know that they have to be in touch with parents, so we'll keep it on the desk, but they don't hold it. We found that this has been helping here, because some things that would happen too when the kids would have their phones throughout the day, like they'd be like, so-and-so's gonna fight, like, so they'd go there and then they'd record it and then they'd send it. And one thing we found is the students also sending that fight, they were getting in trouble too, because they were basically they didn't participate physically, but they're participating in the violence by spreading it and sharing that information or those videos that some of them are really bad. So the cell phone box is working. There's just a no cell phone rule here anymore. The kids were really upset at first, but after I found that way to get them engaged, they were more accepting and understanding to it, which was really neat. Some things that I find that work besides like engaging students is like activities driven around their age group and their like mental health status. So I have some students who will fully participate in all the activities, but I have other ones that won't because it could be triggering. So realizing the difference and keeping these activities short enough or long enough to keep them motivated and participating and really like changing. We have some great activities here. Some teachers now, first thing they do in the morning is they'll call a circle and they'll call me and see if I'm available to come up and hold it with them, just to really create that safe space and atmosphere. Like, hey, home might have been rough last night. What do we need to do, or what can I do to help you leave that at the door so we can have a good day here in the school? Engaging parents, that has been very difficult here in Elmira. Between like not working numbers or just not wanting to be involved, which is pretty sad. It can be really difficult, but we found ways to get the parents involved, whether it be small assemblies or letting the parents, sometimes I'll put my circles on Zoom and we let the parents watch through Zoom and they can, I guess, follow along, I think is the word I'm looking for, and things like that. Another thing that works for me, which I catch a lot of like backlash from, especially here at the school from other teachers and stuff, is really keeping the teachers informed on current terms and what those terms mean. So like some of the kids that I know, they'll come in and they're like, you're like the only staff member that uses slang like us. Well, yeah, this is how I'm reflecting and relating. So with me knowing the terms and what they mean, I know either, okay, this is an okay one to use in class here at school, or hey, just be aware the student's using this term and it's really not acceptable. This is what it means. So when teachers learn and they figure that out, they're able to like put an end to that. But I found that works too, because sometimes the teachers just aren't involved. Or they don't have the social media platforms that we have. Like I'm on Snapchat, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Insta. Like I have all the platforms. I'm a millennial, so I have it. I'm involved, and I'm not ashamed, but like it's kind of educating too, because some things that I see on there, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I completely see why these kids are doing this, or why they feel like they have to participate and do this to like fit in, to be cool, to have friends, or to just not be bullied. And I think some of the most important things that I've learned, like being here within the 4 years, is one, it's so important to build these relationships with students. If you're not building them correctly, you're not going to get anywhere with these kids. They're either going to stonewall, shut down, or you're going to lose them through the cracks, especially in the educational system. And I see that a lot here when we do really good work with the kids here. When they move on to that next school, they don't have those staff members that are there to really support and give these, I guess, trainings and activities and time. So they slip through the cracks, and it's really sad to see. Me, I'm an open book with my students. They can ask me any question in the book and we'll have a conversation about it. We're just being real and honest. I see, say if we have some staff members and they're like, well, I don't do that, or I don't make mistakes. And the kids call them on it. The kids will be like, you're lying. Like, that's false. I tell the kids every day, I'm like, dude, I mess up every day. It's normal. But with messing up and making mistakes, we make it better by acknowledging it, being held accountable, and then restoring that and changing that behavior. And then two, here, what's really also working is just my position is kind of unique. I have the ability to really set that time for students to restore the harm that they've caused to others. Even if it's something super small, it doesn't matter. I've noticed too, with restoring that harm and holding that space for these students, it's really changed the whole entire atmosphere of the school. I have friends, I have students, and I'll walk down the hallway and some of them I haven't even met, and they're like, yo, you got a problem? Go talk to Miss Storm. She'll help you out. Or she'll listen, or like, she won't judge. And it's really cool. So just taking that time and really understanding like what these students need, what's going to help, how can we help to the best of our ability. And I think too, like coming to the table with these students and being like, look, I don't know everything. Teach me something. Hey, if I have a question, I'll ask the kids. And it's really nice because then we can build that really good communication and we can have that safe environment. So I think those are the things I've learned, the things I've seen here. Obviously, we're working on a lot more things. One thing that I do have, but I really don't know how to send it out. So when I was in AmeriCorps, I got this. It's because I do circles in the classroom. So it's called the Circle Forward book. And within this book, there's so many different activities on so many different topics. And I actually pull some activities out of here because they have stuff on bullying and things like that, and just incorporate them into the class, and really just give those students the chance to be a voice and have that chance to make decisions as well here at school, because sometimes they don't have that choice at home. So like just keeping them involved. So that's all I have. So thank you for listening. I do appreciate that. And then I think I pass it to Jeff. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks so much, Savannah. And it was
Thank you.
so great to hear about how you bring yourself into this work, and how you use your relationships with youth to really honor them by being open and authentic with them in your work. So I think it's a perfect segue to Jeff, who is going to be talking more about restorative practices. So perfect. And Jeff, you're on. And folks, please be thinking about questions that you may have for Celia or Savannah or Jeff, and we'll try to get to some of those.
Great, thank you, Sally, and thank you, Savannah and Celia. As Sally just mentioned, I'll be sharing more about restorative practices and kind of building off of some things that Savannah just shared. And so a little bit more context of myself. So as Sally mentioned, I work at Cornell University, and then I also do some public work in the library that's available to community members. But when I think about restorative practices, thinking back eight or 9 years or so in grad school, I first learned about it and practiced it and sat in my first circle and thought, just the power of connecting in that type of community where we're all able to share in that space and see each other. And then also address when things go wrong in our community or when folks are harmed. And so I love that Savannah is integrating that with youth right now. And so that kind of has sort of stayed with me throughout the years, and thinking more about how many different types of communities can be shaped in this type of work. So I put a bunch of links and resources in the chat that I'll just refer to as I'm sharing. But to start off with, as we've talked a little bit about this word restorative practices, so one way that I like to define it, sort of my working definition, is that it's an emerging social science that's rooted in Indigenous practices, which aims to proactively build community, maintain right relationship, and then repair harm through reintegrative processes that happen with others rather than to or for them or not at all. And it's also this sort of split between work that we're doing proactively, so engaging students, engaging staff, teachers, and circles to build community and relationships and connect with each other, and then 20% responding to situations when those proactive steps, those community expectations, those community standards maybe aren't upheld in our spaces. And also just a sort of brief sort of exchange between thinking about restorative practices and restorative justice. There's kind of this whole sort of continuum among a spectrum of informal types of interactions like affective statements or questions where we can share empathy with each other or share how we're feeling, to formal practices and formal conferences using the restorative justice sort of framework from more of a criminal justice lens. But all parts of that continuum kind of play into this sort of broader way we can impact our communities. And so one way that I've sort of noticed maybe more harms or more impacts on community more recently, maybe due to COVID or social distancing, but I've noticed a lot more conflict, interpersonal conflict over the last 2 years. From the time that I've spent in sort of a residential life space within higher education, I haven't seen this level of conflict happen really during that whole time, the way it has been the last 2 years. And I've also, with that, noticed a lot more resistance to working through or managing or engaging with conflict, engaging with mediation, or even sort of talking about it with another person. And so particularly with the college students that I might work with, so there's been this increase in interpersonal conflict, but that decrease in willingness to sort of openly discuss or work through that. And I think this sort of piece around cyberbullying, social media, plays a huge role in where our students sort of see an outlet right now. So like, for example, a situation where I have an issue with my roommate and I'm gonna go onto a Reddit post or a Facebook group and complain about something that's going on, and this thing that someone did in our shared space, before I even named to this other person that the thing that they did bothered me. And so like there's this weird sort of tension between cyber venting, maybe we can call it, and cyberbullying, where sort of putting these maybe more private or interpersonal thoughts in a wider space, instead of sort of navigating or sitting in with that conflict. And so how do we kind of think of it from more of that continuum, that holistic perspective, where we're coming from a strengths-based approach where we can proactively bring some of these skills and these capacities with our students, with faculty, with teachers, with staff, administrators, kind of everyone that fits in that wider community. And one way that's sort of been talked about recently is this idea of community health through restorative practices. Basically, as we think of systems or kind of an ecological model of interaction, there's a bunch of things at play, the social, educational, neighborhood sort of pieces to that. And we as humans, if we're getting less support from these different parts of our community, we're probably not in as healthy of a space to be in some of these interpersonal relationships. And thinking about how is this impacting all of our students. Going back to conflict, is this situationally due to COVID and distancing? Is this generational? And why are these things being pushed more into online spaces than sort of in person or in discussion or in relationship with others? And thinking of cyberbullying specifically, as we think of that community health approach, what are spaces that are currently available to harmed parties to share impact with offenders or to share their needs? Are these spaces mediated through a third party, or are there opportunities to relay these messages? How are families involved in those processes? Same for folks who might be offenders, who might be labeled as bullies. How can they reflect on their impact or see their impact? Is that process stigmatizing or is it reintegrative? And how are these spaces mediated? How are policies involved? How are laws involved? How are families involved? Kind of all of those pieces of that community. So where do we go from here? I think something that's interesting within the New York State perspective of this push to school solutions, not suspensions, and thinking about the role that restorative justice and restorative practices has in that sort of movement here in the state and around the country and around the world. Particularly, RP and RJ give us a framework. So using circles of impact, using restorative conferences, and particularly I want to call out a type of conferencing called family group conferencing that comes out of Australia and New Zealand that could be really interesting when we think about the concept of cyberbullying. But noticing that all of these pieces are voluntary and that you need to provide opportunities for students or any harmed parties, offenders to voluntarily enter into these spaces. How do those spaces typically run? So usually there's a pre-conference meeting with everyone involved, and then a typical sort of flow with a welcome, a review of the incident. The person who caused harm will share what happened, what they were thinking of, who's been affected. The person who was harmed will share their reaction, what's been the hardest thing, how do their family and friends react. Then support persons of both will sort of be involved. And this is where in family group conferencing, it's sort of a spin-off from a traditional sort of model where the family and the sort of offending person will go into a separate room and sort of brainstorm ways that they could repair the harm that's been caused before coming back into the other space. So it kind of creates this extra layer of support for someone who might typically be pushed out of communities or feel like they can't talk to their families or parents or support systems anymore. Particularly in some like recent research in South Australia, where I feel like Australia and New Zealand are always like light years ahead of us when thinking about how to sort of engage in these things in community or mental health. They've kind of studied this where harmed parties or they label them as victims in these types of cyberbullying situations, have conveyed that this gives them an opportunity to share with their bully how things impacted them, get some answers to why this thing happened. It allows them to hear an apology. It fosters voluntary forgiveness instead of maybe this forced acceptance of a result. And it sort of gives them that space to be involved in what needs to happen to make things right. Similarly, for the cyberbully in these situations. It allows the situation to be diverted from courts, criminal prosecution sort of processes. It allows them to explain the circumstances, give insight into how it's impacted the victim. It allows them to experience empathy, which is often missing, especially if it happens online or in a space where you can't see the interaction of what you've done or the impact of what's happened. And then finally, the opportunity to make things right. And they've reported high victim satisfaction, particularly reporting that the conference in this style with the families involved gave them a sense of closure, a sense of fairness, and an overall sort of satisfaction in the outcome in light of traditional sort of processes. And so I found that very interesting and is available in that resources link. There's even another, some other work being done to look at like moving these spaces into online conferencing chat type of things mediated by a coordinator or facilitator or a teacher or an administrator, and kind of meeting a student where they're at and sort of putting this sort of cyber nature into the healing process too. So that's an interesting take on some of this. But then now we sort of bring that back locally. What do we do here? What do we do in our community? So there's that proactive piece. Again, proactive circles, expectation community standard circles, engaging students actively in fair process and peer facilitation, like some of our fellow panelists are doing with their students already. And then expanding again on that community. So what are we doing for the school staff, for the school teachers, for the administrators, the community members, the parents, knowing that they're impacted by this as well, and also in consideration of the light of the pandemic, of where our teachers have been placed in all of this, and sort of where are their spaces to kind of process and to learn and to grow with others sort of outside of that school network. And so it could be building the connections for these folks as well, practicing skills of restorative practices, finding opportunities for healing themselves. And that could be done within things like professional learning groups or interest spaces, other types of circles and things like that. And so that kind of just brings me to my extended open invitation for anyone to join me and others at the library. So I facilitate these spaces on Thursday and Saturday. So the second Thursday and the fourth Saturday of every month. They're on Zoom right now, but eventually going back to in person at some point at the Tompkins County Public Library. And these spaces, again, are open to continue learning about restorative practice, practice skills in those spaces, learn some more of the theoretical background, do role plays, and kind of, I think the most important part, participating in the circle process yourself. I think really sort of open, and something that's done for me over the years, really opens it up to understanding what the sort of true impact of that can have, and the way that we can enable free expression, share feelings, share impact, build relationships. And again, all local community members are welcome to join in those spaces. And I also post the facilitator guides from some of those so that people can go and practice them in their school or in their organization or in their team. And a lot are also inspired by the book that Savannah put in the chat. Circle Forward is an amazing resource if your school can get a handle on that, since it is quite expensive. But it's an amazing resource for anyone. And so again, as I just wrap up, a lot of this work takes time to change systems, to change a punitive process of how we've operated for a long time. And just, I wanted to share one Peter Block quote from his book Community that stands out when I think about this restorative community work. How do you change the world? One room at a time. Which room? The one that you're in. So go out and change the world.
Wow, thanks so much, Jeff, for that encouragement to think about restorative practices in so many different levels. I thought of a couple of questions while you were talking, and perhaps others will come up with questions for you and Savannah and Celia. I was interested when you talked about obviously supporting teachers or others who work with young students or students, and you talked about helping them practice different skills and restorative practices. I wonder if you could give some examples of some of the things that you might do in your circle work with folks who work in schools and with students.
Yeah, so in some of the spaces that we've done at the library so far, typically we'll start kind of in a general sort of circle format. So start with some sort of opening, quieting exercise and meditation, maybe some sort of breathing, sharing expectations of what we might share, what that space is going to hold. So sort of modeling a lot of that process. And then I will kind of pick a learning topic of the day and think of circle prompts that sort of fit that. So one that we did back in December was around affect, emotion, and feelings. So one of the kind of grounding theoretical components of restorative work is this idea that there are 9 affects, and we express all of them as stimuli hit us. And it's kind of thinking more through how do we share how we're feeling, and do that in a way that can address maybe behavior that we're experiencing, positive or negative. So like Sally, I was overjoyed when you asked me to join this panel because I really value that connection. So allowing ways to kind of practice that a little bit more. So that's one example of what we did. So connecting to our feelings. We processed feelings of shame, which I know like all these topics are hard to talk about. And so I think that's really where within the power of Circle, you kind of see some of that vulnerability come through in a more safe and brave environment. And really that's kind of what I hope to help facilitate in that kind of processing space, but also skill building space.
Right. And I know you mentioned to me in conversations we had about some of the work you were doing at Cornell with students, and also I think some work in one of the local elementary schools with some students that you were mentoring, if I got that correct.
So for the most part, the work that I'm doing at Cornell is with like our residential students. And so we'll sort of start the year with intentional conversations that kind of allow folks to process some of these affects as they're getting excited for the year and things like that. I offer spaces for faculty, staff, and students to kind of basically what I do at the library, do a version of that up here as well. And then some of the students in my residential area volunteer at BJM Elementary as a part of their Makerspace program. So those two things aren't exactly connected. I think I mentioned both to you, but it's an interesting experience when you sort of, I guess, culminatingly put all those things together for our students here in Rose House.
Well, and I think all three of you really incorporate some kind of circle work in your practices. You might call it something different, but it was very clear as three of you were talking about the importance of that, listening to students, providing a safe space for students, providing space for whatever emotions they're bringing. I think you each talked in your unique ways about how you went about accomplishing that. I'm just checking to see if there are any questions, and I don't know, Bridget, if you have any questions or thoughts you'd want to add as we start to wrap up this. I'm so grateful to the three of you for being here and being available to share about your different practices, and I love kind of ending with this idea of how we as a community can respond.
don't see any questions here in the Q&A, but please, folks, if you do have questions, we do have a few minutes here. Thank you to our panelists. This was excellent.
Celia or Savannah, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add but didn't have a chance to. We'd certainly be happy to give you a few more minutes as we wrap up here.
I could add something which I didn't think I was going to have time to talk about, but one of the things that we do in the both elementary and in the middle school, high school, is to have the students sign a contract. And the contract addresses exactly what they're struggling with in terms of their unkind behaviors. And so it spells out exactly what behaviors that they need. So for example, I agree to respect the boundaries of others and help others to respect my boundaries. And this means keep my body and hands to myself, blah, blah, blah. I agree to be respectful when speaking to adults and students. And then, so each one is tailor-made by the student. But what I thought was important was that at the end it says, I understand that these are the rules that people follow in healthy, safe communities. I understand that there would be further consequences if these rules are not followed, and so forth. And so it's very clear, transparent. And then at the end, this is done with the adult guardian involved. They sign it. And I think that it makes everything much more clear and straightforward. This is what is expected of you. And I don't know if that's considered restorative, but it is considered, you make the student be the responsible person here. You're not just saying blah, blah, blah. You're saying this is, and we ask them, is this contract, does that pretty much explain what's going on with you? Do you want to change? Is anything unfair in the contract? They're partners in developing the contract. So I think that that's an important piece that works very well in both when you've exhausted all the other possibilities. And the other thing I wanted to mention, following up on what Jeff said, is that in both my schools with FAB and WHAM, once you have a group of students who have shown that they have compassion and an understanding of social dynamics, in both schools, I've had a restorative group, a circle that I asked some of my FAB, most articulate, well-grounded FAB members, if they would be in a mini group to be helping a student who's really struggling with behaviors. And first I asked the struggling, would you like to be part of this FAB group where they're going to give you helpful feedback, and you can then get some ideas from them on how to be kinder in this community. And that has been a very effective and beautiful thing to watch, because the kids that are the helpful ones, they'll say positive things like, I liked it when you did this, and you really have shown that you can be a good person. But then when you did this was very hurtful. And so this feedback from their peers can be so powerful. And I consider that restorative. I don't know if you would consider that, Jeff, Savannah,
Yeah.
but it's not punitive. It's like, work with us, help, we'll work together so that you can feel better about it and have friends. Because of course these kids don't have friends when they behave that way. And I did a similar thing for WHAM, always with the permission of everybody involved. But this kind of feedback from your peers is a very, I think, restorative practice.
Thanks, Celia. Savannah, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, so like when I first got into this school, like there was no restorative practice program. Like I built it from the bottom up. And from then, like I've had a lot of, I have support through my agency, but like the school sometimes, I think my hardest battle, because with what Jeff said, like it takes time. Well, some of these teachers expect me to wave this wand and just fix it, and then it's good. And then if it's not fixed, they're like, well, this is a waste of time. Which I get that battle, and that like I understand why they're seeing it that way. But if they would take that chance to like really understand and break down this process and just just look and see like this process can take years, literally years. And like you can't be half in and half out the door. You have to either be all in or not in at all. And the nice thing here is like I have some teachers that are completely all in, and it is great. Like we have great circles in the classroom. They're always like, hey, Miss Storm, like what can I do next? Like what can I incorporate? What is your idea? And then I have other teachers and they're like, I don't want a circle. I don't want you to come to my room. Okay, well, have a great day, but you can bring your students here if they're having issues. So I think it's really important to really talk about like sometimes it does take longer. It also depends on like those students that you're working with and the communities that you're in, because some communities it's just like so impacted. And it just takes that time to really like dig and dig and dig and then get there and then see the success. And the fact that it's voluntary too. I have a lot of students come in and they're just like, they expect that they have to tell me. And I tell them from the beginning, I'm like, look, if you're uncomfortable, if you don't want to share that, absolutely, just tell me and we'll stop it right there. Or I'll ask another question and we'll just move forward. So I think it's just really important to remember those things, especially when you're doing restorative work, because if you just jump into it really quickly, you can easily destroy what you're really trying to build and work for. So that's all I really have now, but.
No, I think Jeff's comment is moving at the speed of trust.
Yeah.
So certainly this work requires patience and grace and persistence, which it seems like you all have. Thanks again so much to the three of you. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the resources, Jeff, that you put in the chat. We appreciate, Celia, that you have some resources to share. And thanks for sharing the wonderful book as well.
Thank you so much, Sally, for moderating today's panel. And personally, thank you, Celia, Jeff, Savannah, for all the work that you do and for sharing that with us in our community today. And Sally, thank you for all the work organizing the panel. That was really all on you, and I really appreciate that too. So I think then with that, we can go ahead and wrap up this session.